welcome back. And now I have the honor to invite you to an outstanding hybrid panel. It's a discussion led by the President of the Republic of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid. This panel will cover the future of combining public and private sector funding in infrastructure investments with input from, and here comes a lot of titles, from Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Pierre Heilbronn. Then we have the President of the Nordic Investment Bank, André Küüsvek, Director at Operations Directorate of the European Investment Bank, Sandrine Croset, and Beata Daszyńska-Muzyczka, who is the Chairwoman of the Supervisory Board of the 3Cs Initiative Investment Fund and President of the Management Board of BGK. Madam President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. I will now step into your shoes and try to do my best in this role. Indeed, I think we have just seen an ample demonstration about the potential of the 3Cs region to unleash the capacity of development stemming also from cooperating between these 100 million people of the region. Not only with cooperation with our Western counterparts with whom we have been catching up, I believe we have well used that opportunity and we have underused the other opportunity to work among ourselves, to make ourselves a powerful economic region. Indeed, the infrastructure deficit in Central and Eastern Europe is restraining our development, our growth, and also international unity. And the solution here is in finding ways to create trust, create transparency, so as to make large-scale cross-border infrastructure investment attractive to the private sector as well, in order to boost economic growth and increase cohesion and security, while not indebting our budgets further than they are already indebted. The strength of democratic forces relying on the market economy is our private sector. And we must create space for the private sector to invest. We are the enablers. Private sector is someone who has the resources. And also, to a certain extent, they are cross-checking on the good ideas on practical project level. Because if there is no return in the investment, if there is good project which politicians think is necessary, but there is no return on investment, private sector would not help us. But with all the projects where there is return on investment, I believe as governments we should step aside and become enablers. So we need trust, and 3Cs initiative is a presidential format putting indeed a lot of visible political power in support of the initiative. And we need a role model to realize this power into economically feasible projects. I believe that 3Cs initiative and 3Cs initiative investment fund has the capability to provide us with this model where public and private sector work together and where public support will result in private sector trust and therefore development for the whole region. I have a question to you all. Do you share my dream? Maybe I'm totally on the wrong track, who knows? I think we will start with maybe Pierre Heilbronn to give the floor to those first who are geographically removed from us, but I hope feel connected as we are here together. So Pierre, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, President, for this very kind words. And I absolutely share the views you exposed on the infrastructure deficit in the region and the importance of closing this gap for economic growth. You made a very convincing case, I found, that there is a substantial gap in infrastructure provision and general transport integration in the 3Cs region relative to the EU 15. This is a clear barrier to economic integration growth and is a crucial priority for European integration and convergence. Just a few facts to even go further in underpinning what you said. The 2020 IMF report on infrastructure in Central Eastern and Southeastern Europe provides a comprehensive analysis of this issue. This infrastructure gap can be observed in a range of physical indicators, including lower electricity generation per capita, lower internet subscription rates, lower road and rail network density, and access to air travel. EBRD own analysis of transition progress also points to this direction. For instance, just to give one example, travel times in CEB and SEE countries are around 56 to 100% longer than they could be due to indirect routing and slower average speeds than observed in other countries with better developed networks. There is a similar gap in the performance of the rail network due to poorly integrated services and general lack of competition in rail service. So I will only end my answer to this first question saying very much also supporting your statement about the fact that this gap cannot be closed without private sector finance. This will not be surprising coming from the EBRD, very much focus on private sector. And to attract private investors, a high level of transparency and information over project selection, design, demand, and risks are crucial. So very much I would end on this positive, optimistic, obviously message, but also demanding message on transparency and collective action.
Thank you, Pierre. I would now turn to Beata, also from our Three Seas region. So did your heart warm to the words which were said, and do you share also our dream?
Dear Madam President, thank you very much for having me here and today, and especially congratulate this great event and the Estonian idea how to boost awareness about our needs in this region and the Three Seas region. Maybe 5 years ago, so nobody knows this name. What is the Three Seas region? Today we are almost all aware what is the Three Seas region and how looks our needs. Let me start with the bigger view. We are witnesses and we are facing the big global crisis in the world. And now is the time, and probably we are all aware what is the time for better collaboration, working together, the private and public sector. Without this cooperation, it won't be possible to recover our economy. And the Three Seas Fund and the Three Seas initiatives, it is example how it is possible to work together and address these huge needs. As Mr. Heilbronn talk, the huge gaps that we have in infrastructure, how we want to build the connectivity, how much time we have to spend to visit Tallinn, for instance. Yesterday I had to fly by Frankfurt from Warsaw, so you can imagine how we miss our last time when we have number of flights to visit our countries. And what we need desperately is to build these three sectors, logistic, transport, energy, which means that we are focused on the energy security, but we want to focus not only the security, because we have to think about our next generation, how we protect our environment, how we build the green energy in this region, and also the new very important sectors, digital sectors, which we need twice more money to spend comparing to the money that we have to spend for transport. Can you imagine if we think about the roads, rail, and the logistic hub and so on, you can see the huge amount of money. But if you compare to the money that have to be spent twice more for digital ICT infrastructure, so we see it is a huge challenge. I'm very proud that the first digital infrastructure is placed here in Estonia. I visited today this absolutely fantastic investment. It is an example of how we can think about our cybersecurity in this region through the investment in the ICT sector. 600 billion euro, it is a huge challenge, and have to encourage the public sector, the private sectors, and the international financial institution. And on this stage, I kindly ask the international institutions which are present here today as a EBRD and EIB to join and help this region to build through the TRISIS fund, which is called the TRISIS fund. It is an example of initiatives which combine the political inspiration and the commercial driven. So we want to invest together and we want to work together to address all this, our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Beata. Now over to you, Sandrine. Do you also think we have maybe creating here a viable model of being indeed politically inspired, but also economically feasible?
Well, thank you very much, President. Well, I would like, of course, to thank you a lot for inviting us to this very inspiring conference. And we at EIB, of course, are following with great interest the progress of this initiative. And of course, we are very honored to be able to join today. I think already a lot of key points have been made by the precedent interventions. For me, what I would like to add is that the interesting part of this investment is actually twofold. The first is it's about cross-border projects and cooperation, which is, of course, something which is unique. And then secondly, we are now, because of the global pandemic that is still not over today, in a very different situation from which we were when this initiative was launched. And we are facing, on the one hand, a huge need for recovery, to have investments to build not only the immediate recovery, but also the future recovery of Europe and maintain its competitiveness, and also to indeed ensure the shift of our economy to a digital economy and a green economy. And therefore, the timing of such an initiative seems to be very, very pertinent. And then, of course, like for every big project, then you have also big challenges. And I think my colleague Pierre already mentioned this in the beginning, of course, and yourself as well in your introduction speech. The instrument has to be transparent. If we want to have private investors on our side, we need to make the governance of the structure very similar to what they expect, so that we have a balance of power within the infrastructure. And of course, we need also to be visible to them in terms of strategy, in terms of return, and also in terms of exit, which is also something which is very important. But for us, as I said, it's a timely instrument, and of course we are very much looking forward to see and to support the development, of course, of the project that it will support. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, André, what do you think? Is this what we are doing having some potential?
Madam President and colleagues, I think it's difficult to disagree here, and I would go back and underline the opening word, the connectivity. I think connectivity is very important for the markets, for people, all the way down to the individual. Connectivity makes markets bigger. Connectivity transfers know-how. Connectivity enables trade flows, investment flows, and so on. And I personally think that the 3Cs initiative is something which kind of gives a new dimension, the north-south dimension. When we look at the history, then much of the trade has taken place all the way starting from the Silk Road that I know very well firsthand, kind of on the west-east axis, but I think the north-south is very important. And having worked in this region for the past 30 years, sometimes it's almost mind-blowing how over the past 30 years the countries have made a significant political transformation, and the economic model is now very different and more efficient. However, if you look at the infrastructure, be it the physical or be it the digital, I think we are still lagging behind. We need to have something that connects us and makes us bigger jointly, because the growth in the global growth of this planet at the moment is really happening elsewhere at the moment. It's happening in Asia, it's happening in America, and I think for us to catch up, we need to build a road. Let me go back to the Silk Road and remind of an old Chinese proverb, which is that if you want to become rich, then you need to first build a road.
Thank you indeed. Since we have now already in 10 minutes roughly established that Free Seas Investment Fund is definitely worth the investment from all supranational bodies who are represented here today, then I think it's now time to take the picture wider. I honestly believe that the Free Seas initiative has the potential to show how we could further here in Europe and in our closest surroundings, thinking also of Eastern partners and Balkan countries, how we could actually create the first model by this first Free Seas Fund, which would then serve also other societies who have similar ambitions and similar aims, to create something which will allow political and social development of a country with this concrete, rather rigid financial discipline of private sector investment. And I believe that private-public partnership discussion was very loud 20 years ago. Everybody was going this way. Then it kind of got subdued, mainly because, public money became incredibly cheap. Private and public money today cost exactly the same, means nothing. So some people may have thought that the PPP is not so important anymore. But we know that the discipline of managing a project is still the edge which private sector has over us in the public sector. Hence, in our mind, PPP is obviously worth doing. And if this fund is successful, I think it may have the potential to be used as a role model. But what should we keep our eyes open about? And this is now the question to our supranational partners, EBRD, AB, and Nordic Investment Bank. What should we do or not do to prove our concept and our point, so that private investors who invest in the Free Seas Fund will be indeed interested in the next generations following the same role model? So this is a question to EBRD, AB, and Nordic Investment Bank. And I think let's start then again with EBRD. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And it is a fundamental question. EBRD has just celebrated its 30th birthday, and since we were established, we supported around 1,200 infrastructure projects worth 40 billion euros. Around 40% of these infrastructure projects have involved the private sector. So very much the question you raise about how we can crowding the private sector into infrastructure project is a question we've had accumulated a lot of experience, sometimes extremely good and with huge achievement, sometimes much more difficult. So I think reflecting on this experience can be useful, I hope, for your ambition and our ambition around the Three Seas initiative. Our experience showed that public-private partnerships can generally provide substantial improvements to the efficiency of project delivery. You've been very eloquent in mentioning that, because PPP's projects are less likely to be delayed, are generally dispersed more rapidly, and generally also have better levels of cost controls. So all that is very much has to be valued. However, these projects are complex and need to be designed and managed carefully, because private sector finance is highly sensitive to risk. And that's why minimizing risks and providing a conducive and stable business environment through strong governance and project implementation support is really vital. Private sector involvement generally works best when there is a large pipeline of projects with similar characteristics and risk profile, which justifies private sector engagement and enables benchmarking and development of a portfolio of assets. That's why the critical mass also is an important one. Last point I would mention also from my experience is that public perceptions of private sector involvement must also be managed very carefully, because excessive profits or expensive changes in scope can undermine public support for private sector involvement and attracting private capital. So project selection and award should consider whole of life costs and benefits and be undertaken against a robust public sector comparators to ensure value for money. And that goes back to the mention I was making at the beginning, and our friends also from the EIB and the Nordic Investment Bank were making, which are about the conditions to make this private sector more or less viable, based very much on continued transparency.
Thank you. And over to Sandrine now. The same question. What should the fund do or not to do to become a successful role model? Please.
Okay. So Pierre's answer was already very, very comprehensive. What I would add, because we are also talking, as I said, about cross-border investments. Our experience at EIB is that cross-border investments, also under a PPP model, are, let's say, the most difficult to bring forward. And this because you have an additional challenge to every normal infrastructure investment, which is the difficult coordination between two or more countries who need then to align their priorities. And so in practice, what we often see is that you might have one side of the border relatively well advanced because maybe it's a priority of the government, maybe there is more budgetary space to bring this forward. And on the other side of the border, then the other part of the project might be much less advanced or even not progressing, just because exactly the opposite reasons. Well, maybe it's not the priority, maybe there is not so much money. So even before considering a PPP, for example, or an investment, what is key is coordination and project preparation. And those infrastructure investments are very long-term. They are very expensive. And of course, we at EIB, what we do, but like every private investor, before investing, of course, we check the economic profitability of the project, and we check if this, let's say, it will yield also a social dividend to society. Because if you invest public money, you may be happy if you have a positive return on your investment, but actually your primary interest is that it helps society. So this is something also that, in my view, the fund should pay attention to. It's, on the one hand, an asset, because if you have the governments also at the table, then you have a possibility to achieve this alignment of interest and a better project preparation. But on the other hand, of course, you need to be able to convey to the private investors that you have also your view on what could be a dividend, and which can be a social one, but also, of course, a financial one is necessary. Otherwise, you will not get the private sector on board.
Thank you. And that was an interesting grain of thought. André, I mean, could you maybe go a little bit deeper into this? Because I don't know about you, Beata, but I personally think that if we have a project, our project portfolio is mainly politically motivated to, propose these proposals, then you would take the social dividend element as granted. Do you really? I heard that maybe we need to prove ourselves even more there for you?
I'm glad you're raising that point. Coming to the fund level, I think sometimes to do something great, you need this big bang. And maybe the fund is the big bang. And now about this, the fund, I would say the most important is you have professional fund management, you have professional advisors on the case, and then you have hopefully professional investors, including both private and public sector. When we take a step back, I think what matters in the end is really at this level of individual projects, because that's when the rubber hits the road and the reality and the dreams hit the reality, and sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't. I would say on an individual project level, you always need 4 key components. The first one is an identified need for what you are trying to offer. Secondly, you need a vision. And I think that vision here and the need has also been identified here this afternoon. But the vision can be political, but it can also be private initiative. Then you need the management, the skills, and then finally, of course, you need funding. And I think on these last 2 points, it's very important that there is a private sector lead, that the projects get tested essentially with private sector risk appetite. And I think that is which essentially will differentiate over time the success from the failure. One point, if I may, on the PPPs, I think it's an important element, and it's more complex than it sometimes looks. I think on the PPPs we need to check that it's not only the cost of the funding, i.e. the cost of the construction, because the cost only has a meaning at the specific moment of time. And what we often see is that, yes, of course, the governments could borrow more cheaper than perhaps the private sector sponsors, but there is a limit how much they can afford in terms of the overall debt, in terms of the debt service, in terms of their annual budgets. And I think the PPP is the element that, if done correctly, and even in this panel there is enough expertise around, if done correctly, I think you can get things done much faster. Thank you.
Thank you, André. And now, Beata, you are the chairwoman of the Supervisory Board of the Free Seas Initiative Investment Fund. So did you hear anything? You made a mental note about this is something which I will now take care that we can assure our investors in.
The Three Seas Fund was created, of course, after the Three Seas Summit, inspired by the Three Seas Summit political level in Warsaw. And we, as a financial institution, try to find the way how to support these brilliant initiatives as a financial institution. Because the financial institution are trustworthy institution. Because people leave the money in our institution because they believe us. We have experience how to invest, how to be responsible, how to spend money very responsible way. So when we start to create the Three Seas Fund, we met with the financial institution, our counterparts in all countries in this region. When we encourage our colleagues from this region, let's support these brilliant initiatives, but on the private rules, and the market rules, especially we know how to spend the money. And from my perspective, it is how we can encourage the private sector, because the investor in the Three Seas Fund, there's mainly the financial institution. We are involved in many different international investment activities, investment fund, and we are fully aware that the money have to be spent very responsible. And we are the role model how to create this cooperation, how to build this cooperation through the regular meetings, through the convince the others that is a common needs and we understand each other better, and the responsibility for this money is our common aim. So today I'm very, very happy, and there's huge satisfaction that fund is fully operational. Very professional institution manage this fund. And we have discussion with André. Okay, there is a lot of money, there is a lack of projects. Dear audience, we are looking for the money. We have a lot of projects and very fantastic, honest company who manage this project and manage the fund. So this is the space, and this is TRISIS fund, this huge financial vehicles which gives you the entrance to the entire region, how to address all these our needs and spend your money in very responsible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Beata. We have still a few minutes to play an interesting game now here. I will try to match the declared objectives of each financial institution present to the objectives of our fund and see how do you see these two things click together. First, I would turn then to Pierre Heilbronn, and I would ask, the EBRD is holding an annual meeting entitled Building Back Better Economies in summer. How do you view building back better within the framework of investments in the energy, transport and digital sectors? Please, Pierre.
Thank you. I would start maybe by mentioning two or three things linked to the context we are operating, and obviously the impact of the crisis, which has a dramatic impact on our region, and you know that also in Central and Eastern Europe. And according to our regional economic prospects, growth in the EBRD region contracted by 3.6% in 2020 and by 4.4% in Central European countries. So these figures are better than expected, but it has required major government stimulus to cushion the impact on individual and businesses. This has also shrunk the fiscal space for governments to invest for infrastructure gaps. So addressing this gap is really crucial in building back better to stimulate demand. And it is also a huge opportunity, and we heard also earlier during the day, the potential for greening the economies and supporting inclusive economic growth. As such, building back better theme you mentioned resonates very well with our framework, which is for the next 5 years to support green, inclusive, and digital economies. We are looking to support the transition to a green, low-carbon economy. And by the way, we expect green finance to be more than 50% of the business of the bank. We also promote equality of opportunity through access to skills, employment, finance, and services for women, young people, underserved communities. And we want to accelerate and help our countries of operation adapt to the digital transition, which is so crucial to unleash the power of technology. All of that should ensure also that we build more or less a just transition, particularly in the sectors you mentioned. We cannot leave behind regions or individual businesses, because otherwise it will bounce back and probably be politically unacceptable. So there is a lot of opportunities. I think, at least when you were asking about EBRD, we very much see this bright future about finding the right set of incentives to channel more private sector finance to meet pervasive and increasing infrastructure, or decreasing infrastructure gaps. And we really believe that focus on quality and not only on volume is also a very important objective, because we want to support projects that lead to low life cycle costs. And André was very very to the point when he mentioned the fact that we should have a holistic view even when we approach the cost of infrastructure. And we want to generate equitable access with the highest regard to environmental and social impacts.
Thank you, Pierre. André, prosperous, sustainable Nordic-Baltic region. Does investment in the Free Seas nations' infrastructure help your bank achieve your objective?
The very short answer is absolutely yes. There are two big pillars on which the mandate of NIB is standing. One is the increased productivity and therefore competitiveness of the region, but it has its elements also outside the region. So NIB is investing globally. And the second pillar is their environmental sustainability. And I think they link very nicely with the three key themes here. You know, digitalization, transport, and energy, and each of those gives a very significant potential efficiency for productivity, and it also gives a very significant potential environmental impact, you know, be it in terms of CO2 savings or otherwise. And again, if one looks at the map, you know, we are so close together, in fact, on the bigger picture. And perhaps there are too many borders in between. So if I would have the right and the authority to redraw the maps again, then I wouldn't draw the borders, but I would rather draw something that unites us.
Thank you. Sandrine, I mean, your bank in 2019 was among the first ones to make very clear that you are breaking away from our not so sustainable development habits of the 20th century. And thank you for taking that leading role. I believe the whole financial sector globally has been following these clear words. And you have approved a set of targets for climate action and environmental sustainability. Do we fit in with our Free Seas Fund into this objective?
Yes, indeed, we have approved very ambitious targets. We have actually three of them. So the first is to support investment in climate action and environmental sustainability of 1 trillion euros by 2030. And then we have also decided to increase the share of our financing dedicated to climate action and sustainability up to 50%. It will happen gradually by 2025. And then, which concerns then all activities, so not only the 50% green, if you want, to have then all our activities aligned with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, because then our approach, coming back to the concept of social dividend, is then to say, okay, we consider that our contribution needs to be positive for future generation, positive because we have only one planet, but also because we know that sustainable investments actually are on the long term better investments in terms of financial returns. And then also because in terms of inclusiveness, we also know that actually climate change is going to increase the differences within society. So this is how we see it. And how then does it fit with the strategy of the Three Seas initiative? Obviously, we have points on which we differ. For example, because of this commitment to the Paris alignment, the EIB has decided no longer to finance gas projects, with very, very, very little exceptions. And we will have, for example, also a more restrictive approach to roads. Obviously, which we were no longer doing anyway. We will not finance also coal-related investments. But there are plenty of topics on which we can collaborate on the individual projects, because obviously it's clear to everyone that in terms of energy in Europe, we have a lot to catch up in terms not only on green energies relating, to the existing technologies like solar or wind, but also on everything which still needs to be invented or at least industrialized, like for example, hydrogen. Then on the transport sector, again, there we might have a bit more restrictive approach because of our decision to concentrate on climate supportive projects. But when I see in the very nice list of projects that you have on the website, there are plenty, for example, of rail projects. There are plenty of projects with municipalities. So maybe, so public transport, ports. Those are things that EIB is of course, happy to continue supporting. And then, of course, last but not least, on the digital side, there, at least for so far, we have not seen any particular restrictions. We know how critical the infrastructure development is in the sector. We know that the economy has to get more digitalized. And if I may, I was actually particularly impressed by the presentation of the green energy project. So congratulations to that project, because I think it's a very nice one. Well done.
Thank you all participants today, and I believe that Beata and her team and also my team feel that all this hard effort we have been putting into the Free Seas initiative has actually started to pay off, and our digital transport and energy sector related dreams can come true through this kind of cooperation with private sector. So we now remain hopeful that since the investment period is open into our fund, that we will be able to fulfill our dreams, reaching billions to invest into this quickly growing, prosperous region of Free Seas. Thank you once more, and thanks for everybody for joining us, and stay with us. Thank you.